Imagine standing at the edge of a cold, windswept plain 40,000 years ago. The world is different here, harsher, wilder. Through swirling snow, you glimpse movement. A figure, almost human, but not quite, watches you from the distance. This is not your ancestor, at least. That's what science claimed for over a century. The figure is stockier than you, with a prominent brow, powerful muscles, and a brain as large as yours. A Neanderthal, a different species, an evolutionary dead end. Or so we were told. What if that fundamental story, the clean separation between us and them, was never true? What if the line between Homo sapiens and Neanderthals wasn't just crossed occasionally, but fundamentally blurred? The evidence hidden in your very cells tells a different story. A story of intimate contact, of children born between species, of genetic legacies that persist in billions of people alive today. What complicates this story is not just where Neanderthals came from, but what happened when they met other humans. Because the genetic record does not show a clean separation. It shows repeated contact. Contact that went far beyond occasional encounters. Contact that left permanent marks inside living people. But there's something deeper here. Something that mainstream archaeology has been reluctant to fully confront. The implications stretch beyond simple interbreeding into territory that challenges our most basic narratives about human uniqueness. And that raises a question most textbooks avoid addressing directly. If Neanderthals and early modern humans were exchanging genes across thousands of years, then the boundary between them was never rigid. It was intimate, biological, ongoing. And that fact alone forces us to rethink whether Neanderthals truly disappeared at all, or whether they survived by becoming part of us. Tonight, we explore the shadow ancestry that flows through modern humans. The story of how we carry the genetic echoes of a species supposedly gone for tens of thousands of years, and why this truth remained obscured for so long. The traditional timeline suggests Neanderthals vanished around 40,000 years ago, outcompeted by our supposedly superior ancestors. But new discoveries reveal something far more complex, not extinction, but absorption. Consider this contradiction. If Neanderthals were truly a different species, how could they have produced fertile offspring with humans? And if they weren't a different species, then what exactly were they to us? The answer lies in a scientific gray area that challenges our entire conception of what it means to be human. It suggests boundaries between human species were permeable in ways that upend traditional anthropological models. Some populations today carry up to 4% Neanderthal DNA. Others bear genetic markers from Denisovans, another archaic human group. These percentages may seem small, but they represent thousands of genes affecting everything from your immune system to skin tone. For decades, these findings were considered scientific heresy. Early researchers who suggested intimate contact between our species and Neanderthals were ridiculed. Their careers sometimes derailed. The narrative of human exceptionalism was too powerful to challenge. Why was this idea so threatening? Why did science resist for so long what now appears obvious, that our ancestors and Neanderthals didn't just meet, but merged? The answers reveal uncomfortable truths about scientific bias and the stories we tell ourselves about human identity, about how deeply we need to believe in our uniqueness, our separateness from the natural world. But the evidence can no longer be denied. It exists in ancient bones and modern blood types, in genetic markers and archaeological sites, in proteins and pregnancies that cross species boundaries tens of thousands of years ago. Tonight, we'll follow this evidence. We'll examine what it tells us about our true origins, and why accepting this reality forces us to reconsider what it means to be human in the first place. The story begins not with the first discovery of Neanderthal bones in 1856, but with what happened after. How these robust, intelligent beings were immediately cast as brutish, primitive others, despite evidence suggesting sophisticated behaviors. We'll explore how Neanderthals became a mirror for our darkest cultural anxieties, a canvas onto which we projected notions of primitiveness and savagery that served to elevate ourselves by comparison. Most importantly, we'll examine what actually happened when Homo sapiens migrated out of Africa and encountered these other human species already established across Eurasia. The intimate encounters that followed were not rare accidents, but a fundamental part of our story. This is not just ancient history. The genes you carry from these encounters affect your health, your immune responses, even potentially aspects of your behavior. Our shared ancestry with Neanderthals is literally written in your DNA. For a complete understanding, we must reconsider the very definition of species. The traditional concept, populations that cannot produce fertile offspring, crumbles when we examine the complex reality of human evolution. This documentary doesn't just tell you what happened between humans and Neanderthals. It asks you to reconsider who you are, where you came from, and how the answers to these questions have been shaped by cultural biases disguised as objective science. Tonight, we delve into the forbidden ancestry that flows through our veins, and why acknowledging this truth changes everything we thought we knew about being human. Chapter 2. The Price of Denial. To understand why Neanderthal ancestry remained controversial for so long, we must first grasp what's at stake. The traditional narrative of human evolution isn't just scientific theory. It's the foundation of how we see ourselves in relation to the natural world. For centuries, Western thought has positioned humans as separate from and superior to nature. This exceptionalism requires clear boundaries between us and them, between human and animal, between civilized and primitive. Neanderthals became the perfect symbolic dividing line, close enough to recognize as almost human, yet different enough to reinforce our supposed uniqueness. They were cast as evolutionary failures, their extinction proof of our superiority. But what if that extinction never truly happened? What if they live on in us? This prospect threatens not just scientific models, but deep cultural narratives about human identity. Consider the implications. If Neanderthals weren't a different species, but rather a subspecies of Homo sapiens, Homo sapiens neanderthalensis alongside our Homo sapiens sapiens, then the clean narrative of human emergence and triumph becomes muddied. More unsettling still, if subspecies of humans existed then, could they exist now? This question opens uncomfortable territory about human variation that science has been reluctant to explore, given historical abuses of such concepts. Yet the evidence increasingly suggests exactly this scenario. Genetic studies confirm that Neanderthals contributed to the modern human genome in ways that go beyond occasional interbreeding. Their genetic legacy lives within approximately 2 billion people alive today. These are minor contributions. Neanderthal genes influence our immune responses, susceptibility to certain diseases, skin characteristics, and potentially even behavioral traits. They represent crucial adaptations that helped our ancestors survive. The stakes extend beyond ancestry into medicine. Some populations show different responses to drugs and treatments based partially on archaic human genetic heritage. Understanding this diversity could transform personalized medicine. But embracing this reality requires humility. It means acknowledging that our species' success came not from replacing inferior human types, but through assimilation, interbreeding, and genetic exchange, a complex dance of convergence rather than conquest. This narrative threatens the comforting story of human exceptionalism. If we are composite beings, carrying the genetic legacy of multiple human lineages, then perhaps the boundaries we've drawn between ourselves and the natural world are more permeable than we've admitted. Politically, this reality challenges notions of racial purity that have caused immeasurable harm. All humans alive today are hybrids of various ancient populations. Pure lineages simply do not exist in human evolutionary history. Consider, too, how Neanderthals have been portrayed, as grunting, stooped brutes despite evidence of advanced cultural behaviors. This characterization served to elevate modern humans by comparison, creating a false evolutionary hierarchy. The truth appears far more complex. Neanderthals created art, buried their dead with apparent ritual, used medicinal plants, crafted sophisticated tools, and potentially had language capabilities comparable to our own. Yet school children still learn about Neanderthals primarily as evolutionary failures, brutish dead ends outcompeted by our supposedly superior ancestors. This narrative persists despite mounting evidence to the contrary. Why? Because accepting the alternative, that Neanderthals were sophisticated beings who contributed crucially to what we are today, requires reconsidering our place in nature's hierarchy. It means accepting that human evolution isn't a linear march toward perfection with Homo sapiens at its pinnacle, but rather a complex branching process with multiple viable adaptations and significant genetic exchange between groups. The archaeological record increasingly reveals a world where multiple human species coexisted, interacted, and interbred across tens of thousands of years. The clean timeline of succession taught in textbooks appears increasingly artificial. Imagine the encounters between early modern humans and Neanderthals not as clashes between separate species, but as meetings between different human groups, each with unique adaptations, cultures, and knowledge. These encounters weren't rare accidents, but sustained interactions across thousands of generations. They produced children who carried genetic advantages from both lineages, advantages that helped our ancestors survive and thrive. Some scientists now suggest that without Neanderthal genetic contributions, Homo sapiens might have struggled to adapt to Eurasian environments. Their genes may have been crucial to our success outside Africa. Recent studies indicate Neanderthal genes helped early humans combat unfamiliar pathogens in new environments. Others influenced skin and hair characteristics better suited to northern climates. Still others may have affected brain development. This integration wasn't superficial, it was fundamental. The pure Homo sapiens emerging from Africa encountered populations already adapted to local environments and incorporated their genetic advantages through interbreeding. What's at stake here is nothing less than our understanding of what it means to be human. Are we a special creation, fundamentally separate from nature? Or are we the product of complex genetic exchange between diverse human populations? The answer has profound implications. It suggests human variation today reflects not racial categories, but complex patterns of ancestry and adaptation stretching back hundreds of thousands of years. It means race, as commonly understood, has no biological reality. All humans carry mixed ancestry from various ancient populations. Our differences reflect adaptation to environments, not separate evolutionary paths. Most significantly, it means we are all hybrids, composite beings carrying genetic legacies from multiple human lineages. This reality demolishes notions of purity or superiority that have caused such harm throughout human history. These stakes explain why the story of Neanderthal ancestry remained controversial for so long. It's not just about who we were, it's about who we are now and how we understand our place in the natural world. Chapter 3. When humans were not alone. 60,000 years ago, Earth was a very different place. The climate oscillated between glacial periods of intense cold and brief warmer intervals. Sea levels were lower, exposing land bridges that connected continents, and humanity existed in multiple forms. This world was home not just to our direct ancestors, anatomically modern humans, but to at least two other human species: Neanderthals across Europe and Western Asia, and Denisovans in Eastern Asia and Oceania. These weren't the only human species. Evidence suggests others existed. Homo floresiensis on the Indonesian island of Flores, Homo luzonensis in the Philippines, and potentially others whose remains we haven't yet discovered or identified. In this world, Being human meant belonging to a complex family tree with multiple branches coexisting in time and space. Our ancestors were just one human species among several, not necessarily more advanced, just differently adapted. Neanderthals had already inhabited Europe and Western Asia for over 300,000 years when our ancestors arrived. They had survived multiple ice ages and developed sophisticated cultural adaptations to some of Earth's harshest environments. Their bodies reflected these adaptations. Shorter, more robust limbs conserved heat in cold climates. Larger nasal cavities warmed and humidified frigid air before it reached their lungs. Powerful muscles provided strength and endurance. Their brains were as large as ours, sometimes larger, though shaped differently, expanded in areas related to vision and body control, with potentially different cognitive emphases than modern humans. Contrary to popular stereotypes, Neanderthals weren't hunched brutes. They walked upright. They created art. They manufactured complex tools requiring planning and precise execution. They controlled fire and cooked their food. Evidence suggests they cared for injured and elderly group members, sometimes for years. They buried their dead, occasionally with offerings suggesting ritual or spiritual beliefs. They used medicinal plants to treat ailments. Perhaps most significantly, they survived in environments that would kill an unprotected modern human within hours. Their cultural and biological adaptations represented highly successful solutions to life in Ice Age Europe. Meanwhile, anatomically modern humans, our direct ancestors, had developed in Africa. Their bodies were more gracile, with longer limbs better suited to dissipating heat in warmer climates. Their skulls were more rounded, their features less robust. Around 70,000 to 60,000 years ago, groups of these humans began expanding out of Africa. They moved along coastlines and river valleys, gradually spreading across Asia and eventually reaching Australia, Europe, and much later, the Americas. As they moved, they encountered these other human species already established across the landscapes of Eurasia. These encounters weren't brief skirmishes, but sustained interactions spanning thousands of years in some regions. In the limestone caves of Europe, archaeological evidence shows layers where Neanderthal tools are replaced by modern human technologies, sometimes with transitional forms suggesting cultural exchange. Sometimes they alternate, indicating repeated population shifts. In other locations, modern humans and Neanderthals occupied the same region simultaneously for thousands of years. They hunted the same animals, gathered the same plants, took shelter in the same types of locations. The popular narrative suggests modern humans simply outcompeted Neanderthals, that our supposed cognitive or technological advantages led to their extinction. But the archaeological evidence paints a more complex picture. In some areas, Neanderthals adopted technologies similar to those of modern humans before disappearing from the record. In others, modern humans adopted Neanderthal techniques better suited to local conditions. The transitions weren't always clean. In several key archaeological sites, there are transitional industries, tool traditions showing characteristics of both groups, suggesting either cultural exchange or potential hybrid populations. For example, the Chattelperronian culture of France and Spain shows Neanderthal skeletal remains associated with technologies previously thought exclusive to modern humans. This suggests either innovation by Neanderthals or cultural transmission between groups. Similarly, early modern humans in Europe adopted techniques for working animal hides that Neanderthals had perfected over thousands of years. The knowledge transfer went both ways, a dialogue rather than replacement. Perhaps the most compelling evidence comes from sites where Neanderthal and modern human remains are found in close proximity, sometimes in contexts suggesting they lived together. The Pastera Oase cave in Romania is one such location. A jawbone found there, dated to approximately 40,000 years ago, belonged to a modern human with significant Neanderthal ancestry. suggesting a Neanderthal ancestor within 4 to 6 generations. This wasn't ancient mixing, but recent interbreeding. Similar evidence comes from Iberia, where modern humans and Neanderthals appear to have coexisted for several thousand years. The last Neanderthals may have lived in southern Spain until approximately 35,000 years ago. What happened during these long periods of coexistence? The genetic evidence leaves little doubt. Intimacy. Children were born across these supposed species boundaries. Not rarely, but commonly enough to leave a significant genetic legacy. The initial sequencing of Neanderthal DNA in 2010 provided the first concrete evidence. Between 1 to 4% of the DNA in non-African populations today comes from Neanderthals, representing hundreds of genes affecting numerous traits. This discovery shattered the traditional view of human evolution as a linear progression. It revealed instead a complex history of interconnection, one where supposedly separate species exchange genes, technologies, and probably cultural knowledge. More recent research suggests multiple waves of interbreeding at different times and places as modern humans encountered Neanderthal populations across Eurasia. These weren't isolated events, but a pattern of interaction over tens of thousands of years. The true extent of this genetic exchange is still being discovered. Each new ancient genome sequenced adds detail to this picture, revealing a past far more complex than the simple replacement model that dominated anthropology for decades. Chapter 4. Written in Bone and Blood. The first evidence, challenging the strict separation between humans and Neanderthals, didn't come from genetics, but from the fossil record itself. In the 1950s, discoveries at Mount Carmel in Israel revealed skeletons with mixed features. These remains from Skull and Kafsa showed characteristics of both Neanderthals and early modern humans. At the time, many researchers dismissed them as anomalies or classified them to fit existing categories, rather than reconsidering the categories themselves. The Taban Cave woman, discovered in 1932, presented similar ambiguities. Her skeleton showed a mixture of traits that defied easy classification. Was she an unusual Neanderthal, an unusual modern human, or something else entirely? For decades, the dominant response to such finds was to force them into existing taxonomic boxes, either Neanderthal or modern human. The possibility of hybrids or intermediate forms remained largely unexplored, despite the mounting evidence. Then came discoveries like the Child of Lagarvalha in Portugal, a 24,500-year-old burial of a 4-year-old with a mixture of modern human and Neanderthal features. The skeleton suggested Neanderthal traits had persisted long after they supposedly went extinct. When Portuguese archaeologist João Zilho and anthropologist Eric Trinkaus proposed in 1999 that this child represented evidence of hybridization, the scientific establishment responded with skepticism bordering on hostility. Critics suggested the apparent mixed features were coincidental or pathological. The idea that Neanderthals and modern humans could produce fertile offspring remained controversial, despite the fact that such hybridization is common in other closely related species. The scientific resistance reflected deeper biases. Accepting hybridization meant accepting that Neanderthals weren't a separate species, but a variant form of human, challenging the narrative of modern human uniqueness and superiority. It also raised uncomfortable questions about how we classify human variation. If Neanderthals were simply a different type of human rather than a different species, what did that imply about how we understand human diversity today? The breakthrough came with advances in ancient DNA analysis. In 2010, a team led by Svante Pääbo published the first draft sequence of the Neanderthal genome, extracted from bones found in Croatia's Vindija cave. Comparing this genome to modern humans produced a stunning revelation. All non-African populations today carry Neanderthal DNA. The genetic evidence confirmed what the skeletal evidence had suggested: intimate contact between our ancestors and Neanderthals. Further research refined this picture. The interbreeding wasn't a single event, but occurred multiple times as modern humans encountered different Neanderthal populations across Eurasia between 50,000 and 30,000 years ago. The evidence went beyond mere presence of Neanderthal DNA. Researchers identified specific genes that spread through human populations because they conferred advantages, genes affecting immune response, skin and hair, and metabolism. For example, Neanderthal variants of genes called TLR1, TLR6, and TIL10 helped early modern humans adapt to new pathogens as they moved into Eurasian environments. These genes remain common in non-African populations today. Other Neanderthal genes affecting keratin production, important for skin, hair, and nails, spread widely in populations moving into colder climates. They may have helped our ancestors adapt to conditions very different from their African origins. Perhaps most fascinatingly, certain Neanderthal genes appear to have influenced brain development and function. While the specific effects remain under investigation, their persistence suggests they provided some selective advantage. Not all Neanderthal genes were beneficial. Some appear to have been selected against over time, particularly those on the X chromosome. This suggests potential reproductive incompatibilities between the groups, not enough to prevent fertile offspring, but enough to cause issues. Male hybrids, in particular, may have faced reduced fertility, a common pattern in hybridization between closely related species. This would explain why Neanderthal Y chromosome lineages are absent in modern humans despite other Neanderthal DNA persisting. Blood types tell another part of this story. The Neanderthal genome revealed they carried certain variants of ABO blood groups, also found in modern humans. These complex patterns of blood proteins further blur the supposed boundary between our groups. The Denisova cave in Siberia yielded perhaps the most remarkable evidence of interaction between ancient human groups. From a single fragment of bone, scientists recovered the genome of a teenage girl with a Neanderthal mother and a Denisovan father. This young woman, who lived approximately 90,000 years ago, provides direct evidence of interbreeding between two supposedly distinct human species. Her very existence challenges conventional definitions of species boundaries in human evolution. The implications extend beyond Neanderthals. Genetic studies show that early modern humans also interbred with Denisovans, another archaic human group known almost exclusively from genetic evidence rather than fossils. Denisovan DNA comprises up to 6% of the genome in some Pacific island populations. These genes appear to have conferred advantages, including adaptations to high-altitude environments that benefit modern Tibetans. The picture that emerges is not one of separate species replacing each other in linear succession, but of a complex network of related human populations exchanging genes, technologies, and potentially cultural innovations across tens of thousands of years. This evidence forces us to reconsider fundamental questions. What is a species? If Neanderthals and modern humans could produce fertile offspring, were they truly separate species or variants of the same human group? The biological species concept defines species as groups that cannot produce fertile offspring together. By this definition, the evidence suggests Neanderthals and modern humans were not separate species, but subspecies or populations of a single human species. Some researchers now propose reclassifying Neanderthals as Homo sapiens neanderthalensis, a subspecies of our species, rather than a separate one. This taxonomic shift reflects the biological reality revealed by genetic evidence. Others maintain that despite interbreeding, the groups were distinct enough to warrant separate species status, pointing to those Homo sapiens and Neanderthals having evolved separately for hundreds of thousands of years before reconnecting. This debate isn't merely academic. It strikes at the heart of how we understand human identity and diversity. It challenges us to reconsider the boundaries we draw between human groups, both ancient and modern. The question becomes more complex when we consider that Neanderthals themselves weren't a homogeneous group. Genetic studies reveal significant diversity among Neanderthal populations, with distinct eastern and western groups that diverged around 77,000 years ago. Recent discoveries suggest even more complexity. A 2022 study identified a previously unknown group of Neanderthals in Central Asia, whose genetic signature differs from both European and Siberian Neanderthals, yet another branch of the human family. As our techniques for recovering ancient DNA improve, each new genome analyzed adds detail to this picture. The human family tree continues to grow more intricate, with branches connecting in ways that challenge our traditional understandings. Perhaps the most profound implication is this: the replacement of Neanderthals by modern humans wasn't replacement at all. It was absorption, a genetic and cultural merging that left Neanderthal legacy alive within us today. But if this is true, if our ancestors didn't simply replace Neanderthals but interbred with them extensively, then why did science resist this conclusion for so long? The answer reveals uncomfortable truths about how science itself is shaped by cultural narratives. Chapter 5. The Uncomfortable Questions. The resistance to Neanderthal interbreeding theory wasn't merely scientific caution. It revealed deeper biases within anthropology itself. For decades, researchers dismissed or explained away evidence that didn't fit the narrative of clean human replacement and superiority. Consider the puzzling gap in the fossil record. Between approximately 40,000 and 30,000 years ago, precisely when modern humans and Neanderthals would have been interacting most extensively, the human fossil record in Europe becomes remarkably sparse. This period, critical for understanding the transition, is underrepresented in our collections. Is this merely a preservation issue? Or might it reflect a reluctance to acknowledge fossils showing hybrid characteristics that complicated the clean narrative of human evolution? When such ambiguous fossils were found, they were typically forced into either the Neanderthal or modern human category. The possibility that they represented something in between, evidence of intimate contact and genetic exchange, remained largely unexplored. The Vindija cave in Croatia exemplifies this pattern. Fossils discovered there in the 1970s showed a mixture of Neanderthal and modern human features. Yet for decades, researchers classified them simply as late Neanderthals rather than potential hybrids. Only when genetic analysis became possible did the true significance of these remains emerge. DNA extracted from these bones provided some of the first evidence of Neanderthal genetic contribution to modern humans, evidence that had been hiding in plain sight. Similar stories surround other key fossils. The Pistera cuoace remains from Romania, dated to approximately 40,000 years ago, showed a mixture of features that puzzled researchers. DNA analysis later revealed significant recent Neanderthal ancestry. The Sungir burials in Russia, dating to about 34,000 years ago, contained individuals with skull shapes suggesting mixed ancestry. The elaborate nature of these burials, bodies covered in ivory beads and ochre, indicates these were high-status individuals. If people of mixed Neanderthal modern human ancestry were receiving elaborate ceremonial burials, this suggests they weren't marginalized but integrated into their societies. The implications directly contradict narratives about strict separation between the groups. Another contradiction emerges from climate data. The traditional narrative suggests modern humans outcompeted Neanderthals because of superior adaptations. Yet Neanderthals had survived multiple ice ages and harsh climate fluctuations before modern humans arrived. What changed? Climate reconstructions show no unprecedented environmental shifts coinciding with Neanderthal disappearance. If they had successfully adapted to similar conditions for hundreds of thousands of years, why would they suddenly fail? The contradiction dissolves if we abandon the extinction narrative altogether. Neanderthals didn't simply die out. Their lineages and genes continued within hybrid populations, that increasingly showed more modern human physical characteristics over generations. This genetic integration explains both the disappearance of classic Neanderthal morphology and the persistence of Neanderthal genes in modern populations. It wasn't replacement but assimilation, a process with dramatically different implications for how we understand human evolution. Cultural evidence presents further contradictions to the replacement narrative. If modern humans possessed overwhelmingly superior technology and cognition, we would expect to see Neanderthals adopting human innovations without reciprocation. Instead, the archaeological record shows bidirectional influence. Modern humans adopted Neanderthal techniques for working animal hides and surviving in cold environments. Neanderthals incorporated elements of modern human tool traditions in some regions. The transitional chattel-Peronian industry in France and northern Spain presents one of the most striking examples. This tool tradition combined elements of typical Neanderthal technology with innovations previously associated exclusively with modern humans. For decades, archaeologists debated whether these tools represented Neanderthals adopting modern human techniques or vice versa. The discovery of Neanderthal remains directly associated with chattel-Peronian tools at Arcy-sur-Cure in France, provided an answer. But this raised a more profound question. If Neanderthals were capable of adopting and adapting complex technologies, how different were their cognitive abilities from those of modern humans? The evidence suggests far less difference than previously assumed. Perhaps the most striking contradictions emerge from genetic studies of archaic human remains. The Denisova cave in Siberia has yielded not only Neanderthal and Denisovan DNA, but evidence of other, previously unknown human lineages. One fragment, known as Denisova 11, came from a young female with a Neanderthal mother and Denisovan father. Direct evidence of interbreeding between two supposedly separate human species. Her very existence challenges traditional species concepts in human evolution. Genetic studies of other ancient human remains continue to reveal unexpected patterns of ancestry. A 45,000-year-old modern human from Ust-Ishim in Siberia carried Neanderthal segments comprising about 2% of his genome, similar to levels in present-day non-Africans. This suggests that a major episode of interbreeding between Neanderthals and modern humans had already occurred by this time. Yet Neanderthals persisted in some regions for thousands of years afterward, raising questions about continuing interaction. Even more puzzling is the evidence that different modern human populations carry different Neanderthal genetic variants. East Asians have approximately 20% more Neanderthal DNA than Europeans, despite Europeans living in the Neanderthal heartland. This pattern contradicts simple models of a single interbreeding event. It suggests multiple encounters between different Neanderthal populations and different modern human groups, a complex tapestry of interaction rather than a simple story of replacement. The distribution of Neanderthal genes within the modern human genome presents another anomaly. Certain regions show a conspicuous absence of Neanderthal DNA, particularly on the X chromosome and in genes related to male fertility. This pattern suggests hybrid males may have had reduced fertility, a common phenomenon in crosses between related but divergent populations. Yet enough fertile offspring must have been produced to leave the significant genetic legacy we see today. The complete absence of Neanderthal Y chromosomes in modern populations. Despite the presence of Neanderthal mitochondrial DNA and autosomal DNA, suggests asymmetric gene flow. Successful breeding pairs may have more often consisted of human males and Neanderthal females. This raises intriguing questions about social dynamics between the groups. Were these unions consensual cultural exchanges, opportunistic encounters, or something else? The genetic evidence alone cannot tell us. We must look to archaeology and ethnography for clues. Cross-cultural breeding is common in human history. When different groups meet, They typically exchange genes despite cultural, linguistic, or physical differences. The notion that our ancestors and Neanderthals would have avoided intimate contact seems increasingly implausible. The most profound contradiction may be philosophical. We've maintained a narrative of human uniqueness and separation from nature, despite mounting evidence that we are deeply connected to other forms of life, including other human species. Our understanding of Neanderthals has been distorted by this need to see ourselves as special and separate. The evidence increasingly suggests they were neither the brutish cavemen of popular imagination nor a separate species, but fellow humans with different adaptations. As paleoanthropologist Joe Zilho puts it, if Neanderthals were stupid, then they weren't Neanderthals. If they were Neanderthals, then they weren't stupid. The contradiction lies not in the evidence, but in our persistent mischaracterization of our evolutionary cousins. The anomalies continue to multiply. Recent dating of Neanderthal cave art in Spain places it earlier than 65,000 years ago, at least 20,000 years before modern humans arrived in Europe. This directly challenges narratives about cognitive differences between the groups. Similarly, evidence of symbolic behavior among Neanderthals, including the use of pigments, feathers, and decorated objects, has emerged from multiple sites across Europe. These discoveries contradict long-standing assumptions about Neanderthal cognitive limitations. The question becomes not whether Neanderthals and modern humans interbred, but why we resisted this conclusion for so long despite mounting evidence. The answer reveals more about our biases than about our evolutionary history. Chapter 6: Echoes in Myth and Memory. Could cultural memories of encounters between different human species have survived in mythology and folklore? The notion seems far-fetched, yet compelling parallels exist between archaeological evidence of ancient human diversity and widespread mythological motifs. Myths of wild people exist across cultures worldwide, beings described as human-like but different, often dwelling in wilderness areas beyond the boundaries of civilization. These stories persist with remarkable consistency across unrelated cultural traditions. European folklore contains numerous accounts of wild men and women, covered in hair, physically powerful, dwelling in forests and mountains. Medieval artwork depicts these figures with striking similarities to modern reconstructions of Neanderthal appearance. The Russian Leshy, Scandinavian trolls, European wildmen, Central Asian Almas, all share similar characteristics despite emerging from different cultural traditions. Could these represent cultural memories of encounters with archaic human populations? Indigenous Australian traditions describe the Junjudi, short, powerful hairy beings who lived in the mountains and forests. Some Aboriginal stories explicitly state these beings interbred with humans, producing offspring who became part of human communities. Similar traditions exist in Himalayan cultures, where tales of the Yeti include accounts of interbreeding with humans. These narratives contain specific details about the offspring of such unions being accepted into human society, echoing the genetic evidence. Native American folklore includes traditions of hairy wild people dwelling in remote areas. The Salishan peoples of the Pacific Northwest describe beings called Siitko or Stick Indians, powerful, hairy forest dwellers who sometimes abducted human women. The consistency of these narratives across unrelated cultural traditions is striking. While mainstream anthropology has typically dismissed them as universal human psychological projections, they align remarkably well with what we now know about human evolutionary history. Consider the geographical distribution. Regions where multiple human species coexisted longest, Europe, Asia, and Oceania, have the richest traditions of wild people in their folklore. Africa, where Neanderthals and Denisovans never lived, has fewer such traditions. The timing also aligns with genetic evidence. Studies suggest interbreeding between modern humans and Neanderthals occurred between 50,000 to 30,000 years ago, recent enough that cultural memories could potentially have been preserved in oral traditions. Anthropologist Gregory Forth documented traditions among the Leo people of Flores, Indonesia, describing small, hairy human-like beings called Lehoa. These accounts contain specific details matching the archaeological evidence of Homo floresiensis, hobbits, discovered there. What's remarkable is that Homo floresiensis remains date to approximately 50,000 years ago. Yet local traditions describe them with anatomical precision and place them in exactly the locations where their fossils have been discovered. Linguist Pierre Darlou has identified terms for different kinds of humans in proto-languages dating back thousands of years. These linguistic fossils suggest ancient awareness of human diversity beyond what modern humans typically recognize. The persistence of wild people in folklore presents an intriguing possibility. Could cultural memories of encounters with Neanderthals and other archaic humans have survived in oral traditions over tens of thousands of years? While this hypothesis remains controversial, recent research on the stability of oral traditions suggests information can be preserved with surprising fidelity across hundreds of generations, especially when encoded in narrative structures. Australian Aboriginal stories describing coastal flooding have been verified to accurately describe sea level changes from over 7,000 years ago. This demonstrates the potential longevity of oral traditions when they contain information relevant to cultural survival. If encounters with different human groups represented significant events for early modern humans, my narratives about them have been preserved through similar mechanisms. The possibility cannot be dismissed outright. Beyond folklore, some researchers point to religious traditions that may contain echoes of ancient human diversity. Biblical references to giants and mighty men of old have been interpreted by some scholars as potential references to archaic human populations. The Book of Enoch, ancient Jewish religious text not included in most biblical canons, describes watchers who interbreed with human women, producing offspring called Nephilim. While typically interpreted metaphorically, the motif of non-human beings producing children with humans is striking. Hindu traditions describe previous ages inhabited by different types of beings, including some who interbred with humans. While such myths are typically viewed through a supernatural lens, they may preserve memories of actual biological diversity within the human family. Moving from mythology to physical evidence, certain archaeological findings appear out of place in conventional narratives, but make sense in a world where different human groups exchange genes, technologies, and ideas. The Venus of Brassimpaui, carved from mammoth ivory around 25,000 years ago, displays facial features that some researchers have suggested show mixed Neanderthal modern human characteristics. The sculpture comes from a period when hybridization would have been relatively recent. Similarly, footprints preserved at Vardop Cave in Romania, dated to approximately 35,000 years ago, show anatomical features intermediate between typical Neanderthal and modern human foot morphology, potential evidence of individuals with mixed ancestry. Rock art from various regions shows human figures with exaggerated brow ridges and other features reminiscent of Neanderthal anatomy. While interpretation remains speculative, these depictions align with what we know about human variation during this period. Perhaps the most striking out-of-place evidence comes from genetic studies of isolated human populations. Some groups carry genetic variants previously unknown to science, variants that suggest ancestry from archaic human populations, not yet identified in the fossil record. Melanesian populations carry DNA segments that don't match known Neanderthal or Denisovan genomes, but clearly come from some other archaic human population. This ghost population hasn't been identified in the fossil record, yet its genetic legacy persists. Similarly, some African populations carry DNA segments from an unknown archaic human group that diverged from our lineage before Neanderthals. This suggests interbreeding occurred within Africa between our direct ancestors and other ancient human populations. These genetic ghosts, populations known only from their DNA in modern humans, reveal that our evolutionary history is far more complex than previously recognized. The human family tree continues to gain new branches as our detection methods improve. Recent genetic studies of a Neanderthal population from the Altai Mountains in Siberia revealed they themselves carried some Homo sapiens DNA from an interbreeding event roughly 100,000 years ago, far earlier than previously recognized. This finding flips the traditional narrative. Modern humans weren't simply absorbing Neanderthal populations during their expansion out of Africa. Gene flow occurred in both directions across hundreds of thousands of years of interaction. The Denisovan story provides perhaps the most dramatic example of evidence hiding in plain sight. This entire human population remained unknown until 2010, when genetic analysis of a tiny finger bone revealed it belonged to a previously unrecognized human group. Now we know Denisovans contributed significantly to the ancestry of modern Melanesians, Aboriginal Australians, and some East Asian populations. Their genes help Tibetans survive at high altitudes and may influence immune function in populations across Asia and Oceania. Yet without the genetic evidence, we would never have recognized their existence or contribution to human diversity. How many other human populations remain undiscovered, their existence obscured by conventional narratives and limited physical evidence? The more we learn, the more our simple story of human origins unravels. We aren't the product of a single lineage that replaced all others, but a complex amalgamation of diverse human populations that exchange genes across hundreds of thousands of years. This reality forces us to reconsider not just human origins, but human nature itself. If our very identity emerges from the merging of diverse human lineages, perhaps the capacity to absorb and integrate difference is a fundamental aspect of what makes us human. Chapter 7. The Human Mosaic. The implications of Neanderthal ancestry extend far beyond academic interest. They reach into medicine, psychology, ethics, and our fundamental understanding of human identity. As evidence accumulates, the stakes of this revelation continue to escalate. Consider the medical implications. Neanderthal genetic variants influence how modern humans respond to pathogens, medications, and environmental factors. Some Neanderthal genes increase risk for certain conditions. Others offer protection against specific diseases. For instance, Neanderthal variants affect immune responses to viruses and bacteria. During the COVID-19 pandemic, researchers discovered that a Neanderthal haplotype on chromosome 3 significantly increased risk of severe disease in certain populations. Conversely, other Neanderthal genetic variants appear to confer protection against specific illnesses. Some influence blood clotting, wound healing, and inflammatory responses, fundamental aspects of human physiology with profound medical implications. This reality challenges the one-size-fits-all approach to medicine. Different human populations carry different combinations of ancestral genetic variants, including those from Neanderthals and other archaic humans, affecting their health outcomes and treatment responses. The stakes escalate further when we consider the broader implications for human health. Understanding the genetic legacy of Neanderthals and other archaic humans may be crucial for developing personalized medical treatments and preventing disease. Beyond medicine, Neanderthal ancestry raises profound questions about human psychology and cognition. If we carry their genes, might we also inherit aspects of their cognitive traits, emotional responses, or behavioral tendencies? Some studies suggest Neanderthal genetic variants influence neurological development, including brain structure and function. Other research indicates potential effects on mood disorders, sleep patterns, pain sensitivity, and addiction susceptibility. For example, researchers have identified Neanderthal genetic variants that influence risk for depression, addiction behaviors, and mood disorders in modern populations. These findings suggest Neanderthal genetics may shape aspects of our psychological experience. The implications extend into our understanding of human diversity. If all non-African populations carry Neanderthal DNA, and different populations carry different combinations of archaic human genetic variants, how might this shape human variation today? This question treads sensitive territory. Human population differences have been misused throughout history to justify discrimination and atrocity. Yet ignoring biological diversity may hinder medical progress and obscure important aspects of human heritage. The stakes involve finding balance, acknowledging the complex tapestry of human ancestry without recreating harmful hierarchies. All humans today represent hybrid populations with mixed ancestry from various ancient lineages. The evidence demolishes concepts of racial purity that have caused immeasurable harm throughout human history. All humans represent complex genetic mosaics, with each individual carrying a unique combination of ancestral components from diverse sources. The stakes also involve our species' self-narrative. For centuries, Western culture has positioned humans as fundamentally separate from nature, exceptional beings standing apart from and above the natural world. This narrative of human exceptionalism underpins environmental exploitation, species extinction, and climate change. It reflects a worldview in which humans exist outside the web of life rather than within it. Acknowledging our complex ancestry, the fact that we emerged through genetic exchange with other human forms, rather than replacing them through superior adaptations, requires humility about our place in nature. Perhaps the highest stakes involve how we understand ourselves as a species. Are we the inevitable pinnacle of evolution, destined to dominate Earth through superior adaptations? Or are we one expression of humanity among many possible forms? The Neanderthal evidence suggests the latter. Modern humans didn't succeed because we were inherently superior. We succeeded partly by incorporating genetic and cultural adaptations from other human groups we encountered. This reframes human evolution from competition to collaboration. Our success stems not from replacing inferior forms, but from our ability to absorb and integrate diverse adaptations, genetic, technological, and cultural, from other human populations. This perspective transforms how we view human diversity today. If our species emerged from the merger of distinct human lineages, perhaps diversity represents our greatest adaptive strength, rather than a challenge to be overcome. The stakes extend even further when we consider technological developments in genetic engineering. With CRISPR and other technologies, humanity now possesses the ability to alter our genetic makeup, including potentially reactivating dormant Neanderthal genes. Scientists have already identified Neanderthal genes that went inactive in the modern human genome. With gene editing technology, reactivating these dormant genetic pathways becomes theoretically possible, raising profound ethical questions. Should we reintroduce extinct Neanderthal traits into the human gene pool? Could doing so provide advantages for specific environments or challenges? Who would make such decisions, and what might be the unintended consequences? Beyond editing existing humans, some researchers have suggested that creating a Neanderthal clone might eventually become technologically feasible. While most scientists consider this unethical, the theoretical possibility raises disturbing questions. What rights would such an individual have? What responsibilities would we bear toward them? Would they be human in a legal and moral sense? These questions force us to confront the arbitrary boundaries we've drawn around the concept of humanity. The stakes escalate further when we consider extraterrestrial contact. If humanity eventually encounters intelligent life from other worlds, our experience with Neanderthals might provide a crucial reference point for understanding how different forms of intelligence can interact. Would we recognize non-human intelligence if we encountered it? Our history with Neanderthals suggests we might not. For over a century, we mischaracterized them as primitive brutes, despite evidence of sophisticated cognition and cultural behaviors. This pattern continues today. Many human societies struggle to recognize intelligence in other species, dolphins, elephants, corvids, and great apes, despite growing evidence of complex cognition, culture, and emotional lives. If we've consistently underestimated the cognitive capabilities of our closest evolutionary relatives, how might we misjudge truly alien forms of intelligence? The stakes involve developing greater humility about the diverse forms intelligence might take. Perhaps most immediately, understanding our relationship with Neanderthals might help us navigate current human challenges. If Neanderthals weren't replaced but absorbed, what does this suggest about human capacity for integration versus conflict? Throughout history, human groups have alternated between violent conflict and peaceful integration. Our Neanderthal ancestry suggests the latter strategy has deeper roots in human evolutionary history than we've recognized. The stakes include reimagining human nature itself. Are we inherently competitive, destined to replace those different from ourselves? Or are we fundamentally integrative, adapted to absorb and synthesize diverse influences? Our Neanderthal ancestry suggests the latter, that human success stems from our ability to merge diverse genetic and cultural adaptations into new syntheses. This capacity for creative integration may be our species' most distinctive characteristic. The evidence forces us to confront uncomfortable questions. If Neanderthals were sophisticated beings with complex culture, and if they live on in us today, why have we spent over a century mischaracterizing them as evolutionary failures? The answer reveals deep biases in how we construct human identity, biases that persist in contemporary science, media, and education. These biases shape not just how we view our evolutionary past, but how we understand human difference today. Consider how Neanderthals are still portrayed in museums, textbooks, and popular media, often as stooped, brutish figures despite scientific evidence to the contrary. These misrepresentations reveal more about our need for human uniqueness than about Neanderthals themselves. The stakes of correcting these misrepresentations extend beyond scientific accuracy. They involve dismantling hierarchical thinking that positions certain human groups as more advanced or evolved than others, ideas that have justified terrible harms throughout history. By acknowledging the contribution of Neanderthals and other archaic humans to our genetic heritage, we begin to recognize human evolution as a complex network of interconnection rather than a linear progression towards some imagined perfection. But perhaps the most profound stakes involve a question we've barely begun to ask. What did we lose when Neanderthals as a distinct population disappeared? What knowledge, perspectives, and adaptations might have vanished with them? Neanderthals had inhabited Europe and Western Asia for over 300,000 years before modern humans arrived. They had developed sophisticated adaptations to environments our ancestors had never experienced. What unique perspectives might they have offered? Their brains were structured differently from ours, larger in some regions, smaller in others. Their sensory experiences may have differed from ours. Their social structures and cultural practices had developed independently for hundreds of millennia. When their distinct lineage was absorbed into ours, certain aspects of their unique adaptations persisted in our genes. But what aspects of their culture, their knowledge, their way of being human were lost in this merger? The stakes involve recognizing that human diversity, both past and present, represents not a hierarchy of advancement, but a spectrum of adaptations, each valuable in its own context. The loss of any human lineage represents the loss of unique adaptations. As we face unprecedented global challenges, climate change, pandemics, resource depletion, we might need precisely the kind of cognitive and cultural diversity that comes from embracing our complex origins rather than denying them. But the most immediate stakes may be more personal. Each of us carries genes from diverse ancient populations, Neanderthals, Denisovans, and likely others yet undiscovered. Their legacy lives within us, shaping aspects of our bodies and potentially our minds. Acknowledging this inheritance transforms how we understand ourselves. We are not the product of a single human lineage that outcompeted all others, but living embodiments of humanity's complex evolutionary history, walking mosaics of diverse human ancestry. This revelation awaits DN, a testing for anyone curious enough to look. Millions have already discovered their Neanderthal heritage through commercial genetic testing. This personal connection to ancient human diversity transforms abstract science into intimate reality. What happens when we recognize the Neanderthal within? When we acknowledge that the supposed other, cast for so long as primitive, brutish, and separate, is actually part of ourselves? The implications extend far beyond genetics into ethics, identity, and human possibility. Chapter 8. Competing Narratives. As we've seen, the evidence for Neanderthal ancestry in modern humans is overwhelming. Yet different interpretations of this evidence lead to dramatically different conclusions about what it means for human evolution and identity. Three competing narratives have emerged to explain the Neanderthal genetic legacy in modern humans. Each reflects not just different scientific interpretations, but different philosophical positions on human nature and uniqueness. The first narrative, which we might call minimal admixture, acknowledges Neanderthal DNA in modern humans, but minimizes its significance. Proponents argue that limited interbreeding occurred, but had minimal impact on human evolution and identity. According to this view, Neanderthals and modern humans remain largely separate species, with occasional hybridization at population boundaries. The small percentage of Neanderthal DNA in modern humans represents these rare interactions rather than sustained integration. Paleoanthropologist Chris Stringer represents this perspective. It doesn't change the basic out of Africa story. There was some hybridization, but the Neanderthals are still extinct, and most of our genes still trace back to Africa. This interpretation preserves much of the traditional narrative. Humans evolved in Africa, expanded globally, and largely replaced other human forms. Neanderthals remain a separate species, and modern humans remain predominantly African in genetic origin. The evidence supporting this view includes the relatively small percentage of Neanderthal DNA in modern humans, typically 1 to 4% in non-African populations. If extensive interbreeding had occurred, proponents argue this percentage would be higher. Additionally, the distribution of Neanderthal DNA in the modern human genome isn't random. Certain regions show markedly less Neanderthal ancestry than others, suggesting selection against many Neanderthal genetic variants. The second narrative, which we might call multi-regional integration, presents a dramatically different interpretation. It suggests extensive interbreeding between modern humans and archaic populations as a fundamental aspect of human evolution. Proponents like Joe Zilho argue that Neanderthals weren't a separate species, but a variant form of human. The relatively rapid disappearance of distinctive Neanderthal features reflects not extinction, but genetic and cultural merger with incoming populations. Under this view, modern humans are a hybrid species. Our success stems not from replacing other human forms, but from our capacity to incorporate beneficial genetic and cultural traits from diverse populations we encountered. The evidence for this interpretation includes the significant functional impact of Neanderthal genes in modern humans. Many Neanderthal genetic variants affect crucial aspects of human biology, including immune response, metabolism, skin, and potentially brain function. Additionally, recent genetic studies suggest multiple episodes of interbreeding between different Neanderthal populations and different modern human groups. This pattern suggests sustained interaction rather than rare, isolated contact. Archaeological evidence also supports this view. Transitional cultures showing mixed Neanderthal and modern human characteristics appear across Europe during the period when both populations coexisted. These suggest cultural exchange and potentially integrated communities. The third narrative, emerging more recently, might be called complex network theory. It views human evolution as neither simple replacement nor straightforward integration, but a complex network of interactions between diverse human populations over hundreds of thousands of years. Proponents like John Hawkes emphasize that human evolution cannot be reduced to simple narratives. Different human populations emerged, diverged, reconnected, and exchanged genes repeatedly throughout the Pleistocene in complex patterns that defy linear models. Under this view, the very concept of species becomes problematic when applied to human evolution. Human populations existed on a spectrum of biological variation, with gene flow occurring between groups despite physical and geographical differences. Evidence for this perspective includes the discovery of multiple previously unknown human populations through genetic analysis. Those populations known only from their genetic contributions to modern humans continue to emerge as our analytical techniques improve. The complex mosaic of archaic ancestry in different modern populations also supports this view. East Asians carried different Neanderthal genetic variants than Europeans. Melanesians carry substantial Denisovan ancestry. Some African populations show evidence of unknown archaic admixture. This pattern suggests not a simple story of migration and replacement, but a complex history of population movements, divergence, and reconnection, with gene flow occurring in multiple directions across hundreds of thousands of years. Each of these narratives has profound implications for how we understand human nature and identity. The minimal admixture view preserves human exceptionalism and uniqueness. The multi-regional integration model emphasizes hybridity as fundamental to human success. The complex network perspective challenges the very categories we use to think about human evolution. It suggests our tendency to draw clear boundaries between human groups, both ancient and modern, may reflect cognitive biases rather than biological reality. The stakes of these competing narratives extend beyond scientific accuracy. They shape how we understand ourselves as a species and how we approach contemporary human diversity. They influence fields from medicine to ethics to environmental policy. If humans evolved through complex networks of genetic and cultural exchange between diverse populations, what does this imply about the nature of human difference today? How might it reshape our understanding of human potential and adaptation? As Harvard geneticist David Reich notes, the ancient DNA revolution has settled a long-standing debate in anthropology about the nature of human variation. What it's showing is that human populations are much younger than we thought they were. This revelation challenges essentialist thinking about human groups. The genetic differences between contemporary human populations reflect relatively recent historical processes rather than deep evolutionary separation. At the same time, acknowledging the complex reality of human ancestry need not diminish the cultural importance of group identity. Genetic ancestry represents just one aspect of human heritage alongside language, cultural practices, and lived experience. The evidence increasingly supports the complex network model, though debate continues. New discoveries consistently reveal greater complexity in human evolutionary history rather than supporting simpler narratives of replacement or isolation. Perhaps most significantly, the competing narratives reflect different visions of human nature itself. Are we fundamentally competitive beings who succeeded by replacing others? Or are we inherently integrative, adapted to absorb and synthesize diverse influences? The Neanderthal within us suggests the latter. Our genetic heritage reveals a species defined not by isolation and competition, but by connection and integration, a biological legacy that might inform how we approach contemporary challenges. The debate continues, But each new discovery adds detail to a picture of human evolution far more complex than the simple replacement model that dominated anthropology for most of the 20th century. As paleoanthropologist John Hawkes observes, we're coming to understand that the origin of our species was not a single event. It was a process of exchange and integration that happened over a vast period of time across multiple continents. Chapter 9. Frontiers of Discovery. Recent scientific advances continue to transform our understanding of Neanderthals and their relationship to modern humans. New methods in paleogenetics, proteomics, and archaeological dating reveal a past more complex than we previously imagined. Perhaps the most revolutionary developments come from paleoproteomics, the analysis of ancient proteins. While DNA degrades relatively quickly, proteins can survive for hundreds of thousands or even millions of years, preserving information about ancient life. In 2016, researchers analyzed proteins from 800,000-year-old hominin teeth from Atapuerca, Spain, far older than the oldest recovered DNA. This technique promises to extend our understanding of human evolution deep into time, periods previously inaccessible to genetic analysis. Protein analysis has already revised our understanding of hominin relationships. A 2019 study of proteins from a 1.9 million-year-old Homo erectus confirmed this species was a direct ancestor to modern humans, resolving a long-standing debate. For Neanderthal studies, proteomics offers unprecedented insights into physiology and adaptation. Analysis of dental proteins reveals differences in diet and immune responses between Neanderthals and modern humans that genetic analysis alone couldn't identify. Meanwhile, advances in ancient DNA analysis continue to yield surprises. Improved extraction techniques now recover genetic material from fossils previously considered too degraded for analysis, expanding our sample of ancient genomes. The Denisova cave in Siberia exemplifies these breakthroughs. Using new techniques, researchers identified a tiny bone fragment as belonging to a teenage girl with a Neanderthal mother and Denisovan father, direct evidence of interbreeding between these groups. Even more remarkably, scientists have recovered DNA from cave sediments where no fossils exist. This environmental DNA reveals which hominin species occupied specific locations at particular times, even when they left no identifiable bones. This technique has already identified Neanderthal and Denisovan presence at sites where no hominin fossils have been found. It promises to revolutionize our understanding of when and where different human populations lived and potentially interacted. Advanced dating methods have similarly transformed the chronology of human evolution. Improved radiocarbon calibration and new techniques like optically stimulated luminescence dating provide more accurate timeframes for key events in human prehistory. These methods have revealed Neanderthals survived in southern Iberia until approximately 35,000 years ago, thousands of years later than previously thought. This extends the period of potential interaction between Neanderthals and modern humans in Europe. Similarly, refined dating of archaeological sites in Morocco places modern humans in North Africa by at least 300,000 years ago, over 100,000 years earlier than conventional timelines suggested. This dramatically extends the history of our species. These chronological revisions create new paradoxes. If modern humans evolved earlier than previously thought, why did they wait so long to expand beyond Africa? What barriers, geographical, biological, or cultural, contained them for over 200,000 years? Equally puzzling, if Neanderthals and modern humans coexisted in Europe for thousands of years, why did distinctive Neanderthal features eventually disappear? Was it absorption through interbreeding, competitive disadvantage, or some combination of factors? The answers may lie in climate data, another area where scientific advances offer new insights. Ice cores, cave formations, and marine sediments provide increasingly detailed records of climate fluctuations throughout the period of human evolution. These records reveal dramatic climate instability during the late Pleistocene, precisely when modern humans expanded beyond Africa and encountered Neanderthals. Rapid shifts between cold and warm conditions created environmental stress for all human populations. Some researchers suggest climate instability may have driven both migration and interbreeding. As environments changed rapidly, genetic and cultural exchange between different human groups may have offered adaptive advantages over isolation. This creates another paradox. Neanderthals had successfully adapted to climate fluctuations for hundreds of thousands of years before modern humans arrived in Europe. What changed to make their distinctive adaptations less successful around 40,000 years ago? One possibility involves population dynamics. Genetic evidence suggests Neanderthal populations were already declining before modern humans arrived in Europe, potentially due to inbreeding in isolated groups or disease events. Recent analyses of multiple Neanderthal genomes reveal extremely low genetic diversity, lower than any modern human population. This suggests they lived in small, isolated groups vulnerable to extinction from environmental challenges or disease outbreaks. In contrast, genetic evidence indicates modern human populations maintain greater genetic diversity and more extensive social networks. These factors may have provided resilience against environmental challenges that stressed Neanderthal populations. Yet another possibility involves technological and social innovation. Archaeological evidence suggests modern humans developed more diverse toolkits and potentially larger social networks than Neanderthals, possibly offering advantages during periods of environmental stress. However, new discoveries continue to challenge simplistic narratives about Neanderthal capabilities. Recent evidence of Neanderthal symbolic behavior, including cave art, decorated objects, and apparent ritual practices, suggests cognitive abilities comparable to modern humans. This creates yet another paradox. If Neanderthals possessed cognitive abilities similar to modern humans, why did their material culture generally show less diversity and innovation? Was this a fundamental difference or simply a reflection of different adaptive strategies? The latest research suggests Neanderthals may have invested their cognitive resources differently than modern humans. Their brain structures, with larger visual cortices and potentially different prefrontal organization, may have supported different but equally sophisticated cognition. Some scientists now propose that Neanderthals may have excelled in areas that leave limited archaeological evidence, detailed environmental knowledge, tracking abilities, social memory, or embodied technical skills, rather than material innovation. These possibilities force us to reconsider how we measure cognitive sophistication. Our emphasis on material innovation and symbolic expression may reflect biases in archaeological preservation and our own cultural values, rather than objective measures of intelligence. Perhaps most intriguingly, researchers have begun exploring how Neanderthal genetic variants might influence the cognitive and behavioral traits of modern humans who carry them. This represents a new frontier in understanding our complex heritage. Studies suggest Neanderthal genetic variants may influence traits including pain sensitivity, mood disorders, sleep patterns, and certain aspects of brain development in modern humans. These connections remain preliminary, but hint at subtle cognitive legacies. Another frontier involves epigenetics, the study of how genes are expressed rather than simply what genes are present. Research suggests Neanderthals had different patterns of gene expression than modern humans, particularly in brain development. When Neanderthal genes were incorporated into the modern human genome, they brought these regulatory differences with them. Some Neanderthal genetic variants appear to influence not just which proteins our bodies produce, but when and how much. This creates yet another paradox. If Neanderthal genes affect aspects of modern human cognition and behavior, How might this shape differences between populations with varying levels of Neanderthal ancestry? This question treads sensitive territory, requiring careful scientific approach. The most profound paradoxes emerge when we consider what it means to be human. If modern humans emerged through complex interaction with other human forms rather than simple replacement, then hybridity and integration may be fundamental to our nature. Our success as a species may stem not from superior adaptation in isolation, but from our capacity to absorb and integrate diverse influences, genetic, technological, and cultural. This perspective transforms how we understand both human origins and human potential. As paleoanthropologist John Hawks observes, we're not the product of a simple evolutionary tree. We're a braided stream with genetic tributaries flowing in from different sources at different times. That's the story our DNA tells about who we are. This complexity challenges conventional wisdom but aligns with emerging evidence across disciplines. From genetics to archaeology to climate science, new discoveries consistently reveal a human past more interconnected than previously recognized. Chapter 10: The Mirror of Origins. We've journeyed through evidence, competing theories, and scientific frontiers. Now we arrive at the central revelation, the truth that archaeology has been reluctant to fully embrace, with implications that reach beyond science into how we understand ourselves. The evidence converges on a profound realization. Neanderthals didn't go extinct. They live on in us. The boundary we've drawn between them and us, between archaic and modern humans, reflects our need for separation rather than biological reality. This isn't merely about carrying a small percentage of Neanderthal DNA. It's about recognizing that modern humans emerged through the merger of diverse human lineages, that hybridization and genetic exchange are fundamental to our evolutionary story. The traditional narrative positioned modern humans as superior beings who replaced primitive predecessors. The evidence reveals something far more complex, a process of integration where diverse human forms contributed to what we are today. This integration wasn't superficial but transformative. Neanderthal genes influenced our immune systems, metabolism, skin and hair characteristics, pain perception, and potentially aspects of brain development. Their legacy lives within our bodies and possibly our minds. The notion of Neanderthals as a separate, inferior species that failed in competition with modern humans distorts this reality. It projects recent human concepts of racial hierarchy onto the distant past, obscuring the complex interdependence of human lineages. What does this mean for how we understand ourselves? It suggests modern humans aren't the culmination of a linear evolutionary progression, but the product of a complex network of interaction and genetic exchange between diverse human forms. Our success as a species may stem not from replacing others through superior adaptation, but from our capacity to absorb and integrate diverse genetic and cultural influences, a kind of collaborative evolution rather than simple competition. This perspective transforms how we understand human adaptation. Perhaps our greatest evolutionary advantage isn't any specific physical or cognitive trait, but our capacity for genetic and cultural integration, for combining diverse adaptations into new syntheses. It also challenges our conception of species boundaries. If Neanderthals and modern humans could produce fertile offspring, despite hundreds of thousands of years of separate evolution, how meaningful is the species concept when applied to human variation? Some researchers now argue that Neanderthals should be reclassified as Homo sapiens neanderthalensis, a subspecies of our species rather than a separate one. This taxonomic shift reflects biological reality rather than the artificial boundaries we've constructed. This reclassification isn't merely academic. It acknowledges that Neanderthals were simply a different kind of human, adapted to different environments but not fundamentally separate from or inferior to our direct ancestors. The deeper implication involves human nature itself. If we emerged through the merger of diverse human lineages, rather than the triumph of a single superior form, what does this suggest about our fundamental nature as a species? Perhaps we are inherently integrative beings, adapted to absorb and synthesize diverse influences rather than maintain rigid boundaries. This capacity may be precisely what allowed our ancestors to adapt to diverse environments across the planet. This perspective aligns with emerging evidence across disciplines. From genetics to neuroscience to cultural anthropology, research increasingly suggests human success stems from our capacity for integration rather than competition or isolation. It also challenges persistent myths about human purity and separation. All humans today represent complex genetic mosaics, carrying ancestry from diverse ancient populations, including some we haven't yet identified in the fossil record. The concept of pure human lineages simply doesn't exist in evolutionary reality. We are all hybrids, products of genetic exchange between populations that diverged and reconnected repeatedly throughout hundreds of thousands of years of human evolution. This realization has profound implications for how we understand human diversity today. The differences between human populations reflect relatively recent adaptations and historical processes rather than deep evolutionary separation. As geneticist David Reich observes, the ancient DNA revolution has shown that the differences among populations we see today are actually recent developments, arising from mixtures of highly divergent populations that no longer exist in unmixed form. This perspective undermines concepts of racial essentialism that have caused immeasurable harm throughout human history. Our differences reflect complex patterns of ancestry and adaptation rather than fundamental biological categories. The revelation extends beyond human diversity to our relationship with the natural world. The traditional narrative positioned humans as separate from and superior to nature. Our complex ancestry embeds us firmly within nature's web. We carry not just Neanderthal genes, but genetic heritage from the entire tree of life. Our genome contains viral sequences integrated over millions of years. Our cells house mitochondria, once free-living bacteria that became essential components of our biology. At every level, we are composite beings, products of integration rather than isolation. Our Neanderthal ancestry simply represents one recent chapter in this longer story of interconnection that defines not just human evolution, but life itself. This perspective offers a different vision of what makes us human. Perhaps our uniqueness lies not in our separation from nature, but in our capacity to connect, to integrate diverse influences into new creative syntheses. From this viewpoint, the disappearance of Neanderthals as a distinct population wasn't failure, but transformation. Their legacy continues within us, not just in our genes, but potentially in aspects of our cognition, behavior, and adaptability. What did we inherit from them beyond physical traits? Perhaps capacities for survival in harsh environments, forms of perception attuned to natural patterns, or emotional resiliences shaped by hundreds of thousands of years of adaptation to challenging conditions. We may never fully know what aspects of our experience reflect this ancient heritage, but acknowledging its presence transforms how we understand ourselves, not as the endpoint of evolution, but as walking composites of diverse human experiences and adaptations. This recognition humbles us. We didn't emerge because we were superior to other human forms, but because we could incorporate their adaptations alongside our own. Our success stems from integration rather than replacement. It also expands our conception of what it means to be human. If multiple forms of humanity existed in the past, each with unique adaptations and potentially unique forms of cognition, the spectrum of human possibility may be broader than we've imagined. Perhaps most significantly, this perspective changes how we might approach contemporary challenges. If human success stems from our capacity to integrate diverse adaptations, then preserving and valuing human diversity becomes crucial to our continued flourishing. The true revelation isn't simply that we carry Neanderthal DNA. It's that the boundary between them and us was always artificial, a projection of recent human concepts rather than a reflection of biological reality. Neanderthals weren't a different species that failed. They were fellow humans whose legacy continues within us today. Their story isn't separate from ours, but an integral chapter in the complex, interconnected narrative of what it means to be human. As we conclude our exploration, the question returns: why has this truth remained controversial despite mounting evidence? The answer reveals more about ourselves than about Neanderthals, about our need for uniqueness and separation. For centuries, Western thought has positioned humans as separate from and superior to nature. This narrative of human exceptionalism requires clear boundaries between us and them, boundaries that are complex. Ancestry repeatedly transgresses. The evidence of our Neanderthal heritage challenges not just scientific models, but our cultural self-conception. It suggests we aren't the culmination of a linear march toward perfection, but participants in a complex web of interconnection. This perspective doesn't diminish human accomplishment or potential. Rather, it grounds our understanding of ourselves in biological reality rather than mythological narratives of separation and superiority. What might we gain by embracing this truth? Perhaps a more honest relationship with our evolutionary heritage. Perhaps greater humility about our place in nature. Perhaps recognition that diversity, both genetic and cultural, represents our greatest adaptive strength. As you carry this knowledge forward, consider what it means for your own identity. The Neanderthal within you isn't an alien presence, but part of what makes you human. A connection to ancient adaptations and experiences that shaped our shared journey. Next time you look in the mirror, remember, you are gazing at a living mosaic of ancient human diversity. The face looking back at you carries features shaped by multiple human lineages that once walked separate paths before merging into what we now call modern humanity. This is the profound truth archaeology has been reluctant to fully embrace. We are all hybrids, carrying within us the genetic echoes of diverse human forms. Our identity emerges not from isolation, but from connection, a biological reality with profound philosophical implications. If you found this journey into our complex ancestry illuminating, subscribe to our channel for more explorations of the hidden truths that shape human identity and experience. Join us as we continue to unravel the mysteries of what it truly means to be human.